My name is Claire Morgan, and I believed loyalty would always be rewarded until the night that belief shattered in front of 100 clapping hands. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers' gold light scattering across polished marble floors. Waiters in white jackets weaved through the crowd, balancing trays of champagne, their voices blending with the low hum of a string quartet. I stood near the center, clutching a glass that had long since lost its bubbles, smiling at people I'd worked beside for years. I thought I knew what was coming. I thought this was my night. Richard Finch, the man who had been my boss, and in many ways my tormentor, took the stage with his usual confidence. His tuxedo looked a size too expensive, his grin wide enough to fill the room. He raised his glass. Tonight, he announced, pausing for effect, we celebrate our future. Let's toast to our new regional director, Madeline. The applause exploded around me like a thunderclap. I forced my hands to move, clapping along, though each motion felt like betrayal to myself. My chest tightened. My throat burned. The name echoed in my head, Madeline. She emerged from the crowd, radiant, in a sequined gown, cheeks flushed with triumph. Madeline Finch, Richard's niece, had been at the company for 8 weeks. 8 weeks. She shook hands, posed for photos, waved, as if she were a politician on the campaign trail. 3 years of my life had funneled into this very moment. I had rebuilt our operations from 12 people into 50. I had kept clients who were ready to walk, soothed angry executives, at midnight saved shipments from disasters no one else wanted to touch. I had told myself the long nights and the sacrifices would mean something. But in that instant, I understood the truth. It meant nothing. Not to them. Richard's voice boomed again. Family stands by family. That's what makes us strong. His words landed like stones in my chest. Family. That was the reason. Not skill, not results, blood. Madeline turned toward me, her eyes sparkling, her smile wide. She walked over with deliberate steps, and in a voice pitched perfectly for everyone nearby to hear, she said, "You'll show me the ropes, won't you?" "Claire, Uncle Richard says, you're the best." A ripple of laughter rolled through the crowd. My throat went dry. I nodded, though the gesture felt like I had just signed away the last piece of my dignity. Glasses clinked, cameras flashed. The quartet swelled louder. I stood frozen in the middle of it all, my smile stiff and unconvincing. No one noticed the tremor in my hand or the way I gripped the stem of my glass so tightly I thought it might snap. In that instant, surrounded by celebration that felt like mockery, the truth became undeniable. My loyalty had never mattered. My sacrifices had been invisible. And if I stayed, I would remain invisible too. The morning after the gala, I walked into the office with the kind of smile you put on like armor. The kind that fools everyone but yourself. The sun streamed through the tall windows, casting sharp lines across the carpet. But inside me, there was only a dull gray weight. My desk looked exactly as I had left it, the photo of my team from last year's holiday party, their faces lit with laughter, a coffee mug chipped at the rim, stacks of color-coded files lined neatly in a tray. I had spent 3 years in this chair, 3 years of 12-hour days, of skipping dinners, of carrying problems home in my head like unwanted passengers. I used to believe it mattered. Across the hall, Madeline was already in the conference room, heels tapping against the floor as she rehearsed a presentation. She looked up when she noticed me and waved with a burst of cheerfulness that felt almost rehearsed. "Morning, Claire." She called, her voice carrying through the glass. "I'll need your help later. Big client call at noon. Uncle Richard says you're the expert." Her tone was sugary, almost affectionate, but it stung. She was announcing to the entire floor that I was still here, still useful, but only as a stepping stone for her success. A few heads turned toward me. Some colleagues smiled awkwardly. Others ducked their eyes back to their screens. I forced my lips into a polite curve and returned her wave, but my chest tightened as if the air itself had grown heavy. By the time noon arrived, I felt like I'd been walking with weights around my ankles. The client call began, Madeline seated beside me, pen in hand, nodding with the eagerness of a student who hadn't read the book. She tried, "I'll give her that." But when the client raised concerns about costs and service delays, her composure slipped. Her eyes darted toward me, wide and uncertain. I stepped in my voice, even steering the conversation, offering solutions, and eventually winning a renewal. When the call ended, Richard appeared in the doorway, clapping his hands. "Well done, Madeline. That's your first big win. Keep this up, and you'll go far." I stared at him, waiting for even the smallest nod in my direction. Nothing came. He didn't thank me, didn't acknowledge that my words had salvaged the deal. To him, I was invisible. That evening, when most had gone home, I stayed behind, finishing reports in the silence of an almost empty office. The hum of the vending machine was the only sound until muffled laughter drifted through the thin wall of Richard's office. I froze my pen, hovering above the paper. "She's predictable," Richard was saying, his voice thick with certainty. "Claire's good, but she's reached her ceiling. Madeline has vision. She's the future." The words hit me like a physical blow. Predictable, replaceable. I had bled for this company, carried it through storms, but to him, I was nothing more than safe hands, a placeholder, until family was ready to step in. The papers slid from my grasp, scattering across the floor like a flurry of white leaves. I knelt to gather them, but my hands shook so badly the pages wouldn't align. My eyes burned, but I blinked back the tears. If anyone walked by, I refused to let them see me broken. I sat there for a long time, the word predictable echoing in my mind louder than the hum of the lights, louder than the city traffic outside. When I finally rose, I knew something inside me had shifted. The company I had believed in, the loyalty I had given freely, it was gone. And the version of me who accepted being overlooked had to be gone too. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the word predictable ringing through my head like a curse. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Richard's smug smile, heard the applause. For Madeline felt the sting of being erased. By 2 a.m, I gave up on pretending to rest. I padded into the kitchen, made a cup of coffee I didn't need, and sat at the small wooden table where I had balanced budgets and sorted through spreadsheets more times than I could count. I opened my laptop, the screen washing the room in pale blue light. A blank document stared back at me, waiting. "Dear Richard." I typed, then stopped. The word dear felt wrong, almost insulting to myself. Still, I left it because this wasn't about spite. It was about clarity. At first, the sentences came haltingly cautious, as if I were still afraid of saying too much. But then the truth began to pour out. I wrote that I had given Harbor and Finch 3 years of my life, had built its operations into something stronger, more reliable, more profitable. I reminded him of the nights I stayed on calls until dawn, the contracts I saved from collapse, the employees I trained until they could stand on their own. And then I told him why I was leaving, because merit meant nothing in a place where bloodlines carried more weight than results. I didn't write with anger. I wrote with precision, each word deliberate, each sentence steady. By the time I signed my name at the bottom, my hands were trembling, not from fear, but from release. The next morning, I carried the letter into Richard's office, tucked inside a cream-colored envelope. He looked up from his desk with a grin, the kind reserved for someone he thought he owned. "What's this?" he asked as I set it down. "Read it," I said, simply. He slit the envelope open with a silver letter opener, eyes flicking across the page. The grin disappeared. His jaw tightened, his knuckles whitening around the paper. "You're resigning." His voice was sharp, incredulous. "Now, after everything I've done for you." A bitter laugh nearly escaped me, but I held it back. "After everything I've done for this company," I corrected softly, "I can't stay where I'm not respected." He slammed the letter down. "This is about the promotion, isn't it? You're upset because Madeline got the title. You're willing to throw away your future over pride." I met his glare without flinching. "This isn't about a title. It's about finally seeing the truth. You laughed when you thought I'd always be predictable, the safe pair of hands who would never leave. But I won't be predictable anymore." His face turned crimson. "You'll regret this," he hissed. Maybe once those words would have scared me. But as I turned and walked toward the door, They sounded hollow, the bluster of a man losing control. I returned to my desk, the office bathed in early sunlight, spilling through the tall windows. Colleagues glanced up curiously as I quietly packed my things. My coffee mug, the photo of my team, the pen that had signed 100 contracts. Some whispered to each other, others avoided my eyes, but no one asked questions. When I walked out of the building, the cool morning air hit my face crisp and alive. For the first time in years, my steps felt lighter. I had left behind a job, yes, but more importantly, I had left behind the version of myself that tolerated being invisible. The first few days after I left Harbor and Finch were disorienting. For 3 years, I had woken up to a calendar packed with calls, deadlines, and emergencies waiting to be solved. Now my mornings stretched out empty and unfamiliar. I tried to convince myself this was freedom, but it felt more like standing at the edge of a cliff with no rope, no plan. On the third day, as I sipped lukewarm coffee by the window, my phone rang. The name on the screen made my heart race. Michael Roberts, the head of operations at Sterling Manufacturing, one of the most demanding clients I'd ever handled. "Claire," he said, his voice warm. "I heard you left Finch?" Bold move. He chuckled softly. "Listen, there's a company I think you should talk to. Summit Tech. They're moving into logistics and need someone who knows what they're doing." I gave them your name. I pressed the mug tighter in my hands, almost afraid to believe it. "Michael, thank you." I managed my throat tight. 2 days later, I was walking into Summit Tech's headquarters, a sleek glass tower that reflected the city skyline. The lobby buzzed with energy, young professionals tapping on tablets, managers rushing past with urgency in their stride. It felt alive in a way Finch never had. During my interview, the VP leaned forward across the table. "Why should we trust you to lead this expansion, Claire?" I could have given them numbers, percentages, graphs. Instead, I told them about the nights I'd stayed on the phone until dawn, about rerouted shipments that saved million-dollar contracts, about mentoring a team that went from floundering to thriving. I told them I knew what it meant to be underestimated and that I had no intention of letting that happen under my watch. When I finished, the room was silent for a moment, the kind of silence that tells you people are listening, really listening. 2 days later, the offer letter arrived, Regional Operations Director. The salary was generous, but what mattered more was the promise that my work would stand on its own, not on a family name. My first day at Summit Tech felt like stepping onto a new stage. I entered the boardroom where a dozen faces waited, skeptical but curious. I didn't lecture them. I asked questions. I listened. By the end of the meeting, the atmosphere shifted. Shoulders, eased voices grew stronger. I could feel it, the start of trust. The real test came weeks later when Sterling threatened to pull a major contract over delays. All eyes turned to me. Madeline would have floundered, but I steadied my voice, laid out a plan, and rallied the team. For 2 sleepless days, we rerouted shipments, negotiated penalties, and I personally calmed Sterling's executives over the phone. On the 3rd morning, Michael called back. "We'll stay," he said simply, "because of you." When I shared the news, my team erupted. Someone brought coffee and donuts. Laughter filled the office, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years: belonging. The numbers told the rest. Retention rates soared, revenue climbed 40%, satisfaction hit record highs. But the numbers were only proof of what I already knew. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't invisible. One night as I left the office, I caught my reflection in the glass doors. I looked tired, yes, but stronger. Gone was the woman who clapped for someone else's victory. What I saw staring back was someone finally rewriting her own story. Word travels fast in logistics. Within months of joining Summit Tech, whispers about Harbor and Finch began circling through the industry like smoke before fire. Clients were restless deliveries, delayed service slipping. I would overhear fragments at conferences, see quiet updates on LinkedIn contracts, lost managers leaving. At first, I ignored it. I told myself it wasn't my problem anymore. But when you've spent years building something, even if it hurt you, watching it crumble leaves an ache you can't quite dismiss. One evening, I was still at my desk after most of the office had cleared out. My phone buzzed, and when I saw the name, my stomach tightened. Linda. She had been one of my brightest team members at Finch Sharp and determined but always overlooked by Richard. Her voice cracked as soon as she spoke. Claire, it's bad. We lost Sterling. Now Greenway's threatening to pull out too. People are panicking. Richard's pointing fingers, but he won't take responsibility. Everyone's scared of layoffs. I leaned back in my chair, pressing the phone tighter to my ear. I could picture her, hunched over her desk, the fluorescent lights humming overhead, the tension thick in the air. You don't deserve this, Linda, I said softly. None of you do. She hesitated, then whispered, Do you think Summit Tech has room for me? Any position, I'll take it. I remembered the fear I had felt the morning I walked out with nothing but a box and a letter. I knew that feeling of standing on the edge, waiting for the floor to give way. Send me your resume, I told her. I'll make sure it gets seen. A week later, Linda sat across from me in Summit Tech's conference room. Her eyes were tired, but hopeful. She aced the interview, of course. She always had the talent. She just needed a place that valued it. When she got the offer, she hugged me in the hallway, whispering, You saved me. It wasn't just Linda. Over the next few months, messages trickled in former colleagues, asking if there was space if I knew of opportunities elsewhere. Some I could help directly, others I guided to contacts in the industry. Each story was familiar, loyal employees left behind, while Richard clung to his pride and propped up Madeline as a savior she could never be. One afternoon, I bumped into Daniel, another former coworker, at a coffee shop downtown. His tie was loosened, his face pale with exhaustion. Claire, he said, with a hollow laugh, you got out at the perfect time. The place is collapsing. Layoffs are coming. Nobody feels safe anymore. I stirred my coffee slowly, the bitterness rising on my tongue. Part of me felt vindicated, but another part mourned. I had poured so much of myself into that company, and now it was unraveling, pulling good people down with it. Back at Summit Tech, I doubled down on my commitment to never let that happen again. I fought for my team's resources, argued for promotions based on merit, not politics. Every time we won a contract, every time we celebrated a new success, it felt like another brick laid in the foundation of something lasting. And yet, in the quiet corners of my mind, I knew the story with Finch wasn't over. Companies like Richard's didn't fade quietly. They clung to image, to ceremony, to the illusion of control. I had a feeling sooner or later Richard would try to pull me back into his orbit. The envelope arrived on a Wednesday, heavy with embossed lettering that seemed designed to impress. Harbor and Finch, Annual Gala, honoring past leaders, it read. My name was written in careful script beneath the invitation. For a long time, I just stared at it, unsure if it was meant as an insult or a plea. Part of me wanted to toss it straight into the trash. But another part, the one that still carried the scars of those years, felt compelled to walk back into that ballroom, not as a forgotten employee, but as someone who had rebuilt herself. The night of the gala, I slipped into a navy dress and pinned my hair back, hands trembling slightly as I fastened my earrings. The cab ride downtown was quiet, the city lights rushing past the window. When the hotel ballroom came into view, glittering just as it had the night everything changed, my stomach knotted. Inside the room buzzed with forced cheer. Chandeliers sparkled overhead. The quartet played something elegant, and Richard worked the crowd like a politician desperate for votes. His laugh was loud, practiced. I felt eyes on me as I entered, whispers, double takes, a few awkward smiles. Halfway through the evening, the lights dimmed, and Richard strode onto the stage, microphone in hand. Tonight, he began, we not only celebrate our bright future, but honor those whose dedication paved the way. His gaze swept the room before landing on me. It is my privilege to present the Excellence in Leadership Award to Claire Morgan. The applause hit like a wave. I froze for half a beat, then rose, heels clicking against the polished floor as I walked toward the stage. Richard handed me a crystal trophy, his fingers brushing mine. He leaned close, his voice low. Come back, Claire. We need you. My throat tightened, but I forced myself to face the crowd. Hundreds of faces stared back, some curious, some expectant, others pretending to be neutral. For a moment, all I could hear was the rush of blood in my ears. I gripped the microphone. 3 years ago, I stood in a ballroom like this one clapping for a promotion that should have been mine. I told myself loyalty would be enough, that if I gave more, worked harder someday, I'd be recognized. My voice grew steadier as I continued. But I learned something that night. Loyalty without respect is servitude. And I will never mistake the two again. A hush fell over the room. I saw Madeline's face pale, her smile faltering. Richard shifted uneasily beside me. I found a place where merit matters more than bloodlines. I said my words, cutting through the silence. Where hard work is honored, not overlooked. And that is where I belong. For a moment, no one moved. Then the applause began, hesitant at first, then stronger, filling the room. Some clapped politely, others with conviction. I didn't care which. I set the trophy down gently on the podium, not in anger, but in closure. Thank you for this recognition, I added, my voice softer now. But I don't need to come back to know my worth. I stepped away from the microphone, the applause echoing as I walked off the stage. Richard reached out his hand, brushing my arm as if to stop me. But I kept moving, weaving through the crowd until I reached the tall doors. The night air outside was crisp, cool against my skin. I breathed deeply, the city lights stretching out before me, alive and endless. Behind me, the music from the ballroom drifted faintly, but it no longer had power over me. I hailed a cab and slid into the back seat, my heart still pounding, but this time with something closer to freedom than fear. As the driver pulled into traffic, I looked out the window at the city rushing past and realized I had finally closed the chapter that once defined me. When I got home that night, I set the crystal trophy on my bookshelf. For a moment, it caught the city lights streaming through the window and glittered as if it meant something. Beside it sat a framed photo of my new team at Summit Tech, taken just a month earlier after we secured our biggest client. Their smiles were real, their arms linked, their energy alive. Looking at the two side by side, the contrast was almost painful. One was hollow recognition from a place that never valued me. The other was proof that I finally belonged somewhere. The days that followed were ordinary in the best way. Morning coffees with my team, brainstorming sessions full of laughter, late nights that ended not in exhaustion, but in accomplishment. I no longer walked into rooms bracing for dismissal. I walked in knowing my voice mattered. Sometimes I thought back to Richard's words, predictable. I realized he had been wrong all along. What he saw as predictable was persistence. What he dismissed as safe was strength. He couldn't see it because he never wanted to, but I did. And that was enough. One Friday evening, as people packed up for the weekend, Linda stopped by my desk with a grin. We nailed the Greenway expansion. They want to double the contract next quarter. She placed a folder on my desk like it was a gift. I smiled, feeling something warm spread through me. That's because of you, I told her. She shook her head. No, Claire, because of us. After she left, I sat for a while in the quiet office. The city lights flickered outside, and for the first time the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. That night, before I went to bed, I opened my journal and wrote a single line. Sometimes the best revenge isn't taking back what you lost. It's becoming who you were always meant to be. I closed the book, turned off the lamp, and lay back in the dark. The weight I had carried for years was gone. The past no longer defined me. And for the first time in a long time, I slept without doubt. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy these family drama and revenge stories, please subscribe and join me for more every day.